Thank you. I think what a wonderful session today, and the kind of speakers we've had are just fabulous because the amount of data I consume today as part of being in this room about the inflection point and what really India is going to go through over the next decade or two is just so inspiring. So inspiring. But it brings me to a question. It's easy to stand here and say that the government should do this, and maybe we're part of this journey. This journey, this inflection point, this cusp, was expected to begin in 2022. Maybe we were having the same conversations 2 years ago. We were having the same conversation last year, and we continue to have the same conversation today. The cusp we're all waiting for. Does it mean it's not there? Possibly not. How soon is it going to arrive? Maybe we're already going through it as we speak right now. But there comes a question of taking individual responsibility of what you and I are really doing to deserve being part of the cusp at that moment and to ride that wave and to be part of that inflection point, right? What is it that you are doing today? What is it that I am doing today? And when I think of it in a nuclear basis, on the basis of an individual, I often look at the question from the perspective of a small business, which is, what is the rate of growth that you as a business should grow at so that you're growing well? Because at the end of the day, every MSME, every entrepreneur is looking at the dream of India's numbers, but at the end of the day, I want to see at what is the growth that impacts me immediately in the short term, and of course, I'm riding it for the long term, right? And when I look at that, I ask myself the question, what is the right growth rate that today all entrepreneurs in India should really be focusing on? And there is a formula that I look at, and I think it gives me my answer, which is if India today is growing at 6% per annum GDP, you would ideally today want to be in a business where your industry is growing at 1.5 to 2 times India's GDP growth rate, to be actually making the right bet on starting a business where the tailwinds are, correct? Which means I'm assuming the industry you operate in possibly is going to grow at 9 to 12% per annum. 1.5 to 2 times the growth rate of India. Then you as a small player who is looking at this average growth rate of this industry are starting at a small base, which means your growth rate should definitely be higher than the industry's growth rate, and very safe to assume at least 2 times the industry's growth rate, which tells us that practically every small business today has to look at growing between 18 to 24% per annum. And if your business is not growing at, give or take, 20% per annum, there is possibly a problem. Now, the easiest thing to say is to really go on public forums and say the government isn't doing enough. And yeah, all of this is narrative, but how is my life getting impacted? But I say, okay, let's take some personal ownership today. If we have to grow at 20%, and you could be a solopreneur, like a solo entrepreneur, or maybe someone with a business of 1,000 people working for you. As a CEO of that business, if you have to look at what really do you have to optimize for to be able to get 20% per annum growth, you'll see a CEO's responsibility is primarily twofold. You have to take personal responsibility for the sales of your business, because sales solves more than 50% of the problems in business. You've got sales, you've got the money coming in, you can hire people, you can get AI tools, you can take new technology, you can do everything with sales, right? That's one. And the second, even more important, that most of us tend to forget, is actually the function of development, where new growth comes from. And when we speak of development, I would say there is new product development, there is new market development, and of course, there is R&D and learning and development. This is where I would think an individual owner, an individual business owner should probably focus their energies if they want to ride this point of inflection and ride the wave of India's growth story for the next 2 decades. But how do you really do it? How do you do it? I was looking at some data on how is it that China did it and found some very interesting insights, which is if you look at data for 2023, India had 90,000 patents in 2023. And by comparison, China had 1.7 million patents the same year, the very same year. I'm afraid to even calculate the multiple by which they've beaten us in the number of patents. And then I look at another data point, which is, let's look at what percentage of our GDP really goes towards research and development and learning and development. And when we plot countries on this one data point, and this data set actually shows us that India as a whole spends close to 0.6% of its GDP on research and development and learning and development. We're not even in the top 25%. We're not part of the top 50% countries which are spending on R&D. And I wanted to look at, is there a responsibility I can take upon myself? Is there some bit of accountability I can take and maybe make a little bit of a difference? I said maybe the growth rate in our R&D spend is now increasing as our GDP is growing. And then when I look at how the R&D spends in different economies are growing at what rate, just look at this data. China's spend on R&D is growing at almost 14% per annum. 14% per annum. Despite getting 1.7 million patents in a year. India is not even part of this chart yet. This, of course, is India's data, where we look at how our absolute R&D expenditure is definitely growing year on year. But the percentage to the GDP continues to fall. It used to be at its high, close to 0.8% of India's GDP a few years ago, and right now stands at closer to 0.6%. Is there a problem? And you think it's a question that I'm posing to this room today? Well, possibly not. Because this has also been discussed in the parliament as recent as last month. And this is a press release that we see which says the reason India's R&D spend is so low is because only about 35 or 36% of the total R&D in India is done by private players and private enterprises. Whereas when you look at data for other countries, the ownership for that R&D is taken up where 70% of the R&D spend comes from private enterprise, which actually tells us that if we pull up the data to say India does not spend on R&D and blame the government for it, we first need to look inwards and probably take that responsibility ourselves, right? And when I ask you, okay, what should be the percentage spend of your annual sales as a business owner on R&D activities, we don't even have benchmarks in India yet. Because when we look at the most innovative companies around the world, this is the list as per innovative rankings. Look at this. Google spends about 15%, Amazon 13%, Microsoft 14%, Tesla 12%. Right at the top of innovation rankings is actually Apple, spending 5%, and despite its size, I mean, we all know what's happened to their share price after they announced the iPhone 17, and what really is being spoken about in innovation circles about maybe Apple having lost its charm or its golden touch, correct? And a lot of you would say that 14-15% is a very high percentage of my sales amount to be investing in R&D because my margins don't allow me that much spend, correct? Very fair. Very fair. But I would say when we look at manufacturing entities, trading entities, anywhere close to 2-3% is still fair, because if countries such as Israel can spend upwards of 6% of their GDP on R&D as a small enterprise, all I ask is 2%. Now comes a question, which is, I am a service provider. You know, imagine my annual revenue is 100 rupees. From 100 rupees, I'm asked to spend 2 rupees on just learning and development, research and development. As a service provider, as a freelancer, as a solo entrepreneur, that a great majority of India's entrepreneurs are, that 2% will barely make a dent. It won't make a dent. So I need to probably change my lens to look at, it's not a percentage of my revenue. Maybe that's a metric I should leave to the manufacturers. But for me as an individual entrepreneur, I should look at what percentage of my time am I dedicating and devoting to learning and development activities. 2% of the day would be barely anything. But can I get to 15% of my day? When I think about it in the context of percentage of the total time available, I possibly can. And I remember that as a knowledge professional, back in 2021, till that time in our organization, we would do training programs on the third Saturday of every single month. Third Saturday, I would have my entire team in the conference room. Morning till evening, myself, other experts, my partners would train them. Beta, learn. These are the updates on taxation. This is what is happening in business. By lunchtime, there was literally barely anything going inside their heads. You can imagine. We've all been there. And I thought this wasn't really the right way to do learning and development. We need to change that. So I thought, okay, maybe 5% of my day, every day, should just go towards it. And the best way to train my team, which could also be at a client site or working remotely, is possibly to make a video, 8 to 10 minutes long, put it up on a portal, and share it on the office WhatsApp group to say, this is your learning of the day that everyone in the team has to watch. Every day, 10 minutes, passive consumption. The team could also watch it while having lunch, no problems. And this is how this entire journey started back in 2021. What you see here is again one of the early training videos on ESOPs. How do you implement ESOPs in a business? You can see from the timestamp that it was about a 7-minute long video where I explain the concept. I'm just speaking to the camera. I'm essentially speaking to my team. And the entire explanation is actually copy-pasted and put in the description for someone to read and refer to. This video would be posted on Instagram and then cross-posted on YouTube. Why? Because if any of my team wanted to search for when I taught them about ESOPs, they could not do that search on Instagram. The only place they could search keywords was YouTube, so it went with the entire description on YouTube. And of course, while I was at it, I just copy-pasted the description onto LinkedIn and made it a LinkedIn post. Fair, easy. Easy stuff that all of us can do, right? But then came this one challenge where after the 90th day, I was like, okay, I've covered TDS, I've covered GST, I've covered valuations, I've covered ESOPs, co-founders, shareholders. No more topics left. None. 90 days, and I guarantee you, you could be in real estate, you could be in manufacturing, you could be in robotics, tangibly studying engineering every day. And I want to give this challenge to practically every entrepreneur of India today. Just sit down and write 90 topics that you can teach to your team. maybe your peers, maybe the public at large, no matter what expert you are. When I started doing this, I was in this profession for almost 12 years. Over a decade of experience in the field and not even 100 insights. If you really want to measure how much knowledge you and I have sitting in this room, or maybe people listening to this on TV, 100 insights. I challenge you. Do this today. Try and write down all the topics you can talk about. And if you can't get to the number of 100, that's how fragile our knowledge is. And I'm talking about 2021, then when AI did not even exist, right? I mean, if we were to look at it from the lens of AI, we're all practically unemployable right away. Right away. And India's biggest export is the services of its knowledge professionals. Correct? Okay. So that evening, I started reading. I remember 11 in the night, and I'd not put out a video. And I was like, okay, I didn't put out anything today. And maybe I'm going to be facing the judgment of my entire team saying, आज सर के पास कुछ बताने को था नहीं. So I thought, I can't let that happen. I opened up one of my old finance books looking for a topic. What is it that I can talk about? And I'm reading till 2 a.m. I finally find something and I wake up my wife saying, listen, you need to hold up this phone for me. I have to put out this video. One day she's like, okay, this guy's gone crazy. This can definitely not last. Interestingly, she played along. She did it the first night, then the second. The third night, she was like, listen, you need to stop this. I need to go off to sleep at 11 p.m. You can't be up till 2 a.m. with the lights on, reading. So I thought, okay, how do I put her to sleep? I bought an iPad because the lights can be off and I can still continue to read. At that time, started a journey where I was practically reading every night for 3 hours from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., trying to find that one topic that the following morning at 9 a.m. I would get to my desk, make a video, only so that my team could learn something. And fortunately at the same time, I stumbled upon this book called Building a Second Brain, which essentially says that humans tend to forget 90% of the things, and I'm probably still underestimating. 99% of the things that we consume, we will forget. Our brains are not designed to keep that knowledge. So no matter how much you study, it's not going to stick. And this book talks about a topic where every person needs to build a second brain that is outside of themselves, which is whatever you learn, you capture the insight, you organize it, you distill it, you express it, and you store it into your second brain so that you can take it out and use it whenever required. Don't depend on your memory. So I thought, okay, 2 WhatsApp groups. The first, where I put content ideas. Anything interesting that someone said that I would want to research and learn about, I just put it right there and I let it be. When I find some time later during the day, I'm just intrigued. I have 2 hours to study. I'll open it up, start reading. Whatever I find, I put in the other WhatsApp group, which has all the organized information. For example, 2021 was also when I was really curious about the business of WWE. Did you know it's a listed entity in the US? Listed entity? Wildly profitable. So I read up about it, how they own the intellectual property, how every time Dwayne Johnson uses the term The Rock for himself, he needs to pay a royalty to WWE. Man, that was fascinating. I just put it out as a post and it rests. It continues to rest in the WhatsApp group today, where if someone brings up WWE in conversation, I can quickly search for WWE, go through that message and be more interesting in the conversation, correct? Okay. As luck would have it, as more and more such information started getting collected, a publisher called me. He's like, you keep writing every day about how businesses are valued, how to raise capital. Can I just write a book for you, organize all of this into a book? And I said, sure, I mean, why not? The first book on startup fundraising came about in 2021. No, 2022. The following year, I'd written 500 more topics. And then he said, listen, there's so much more to what you've put out. Can we put out another book? And I said, sure. Then came out another book called Founder's Office. The third one comes out this September as we speak. But then this has been a journey of learning and development for the past 4 years. And I can tell you, with all the education I've practically had over the past 20 years of formal education, doing my undergrad in finance, my CA, my CS, my CMA, going to ISB, and I have so much gratitude towards all these institutions because they've given so much. But I would not shy away from saying that the amount of learning I've had in the past 4 years is far more than what I had 20 years before that. And I really wish I had started this back when I was doing my education. My learning from my institutions would have just absolutely blown up. I would have been a different person. And this is why I speak about it. The first thing we need to do, take individual ownership, is for our own L&D and R&D. And I don't ask you to put a single rupee. I just ask you to put 1 hour every day in R&D for your business. Now, we speak about the other aspect, which is a CEO should focus on development and sales. And whenever you speak with consultants and gurus about how do you really increase sales, there is a formula. You increase the number of visitors to your web store, maybe the amount of footfall you get at your offline store. Then you look at a conversion rate, and then you try to increase the average order value, or maybe the repeat rate and the frequency of buying. But what we don't realize is there is one aspect that actually impacts conversion the most, which is really trust. But how do you measure trust? Is there a way for you to figure out how can I measure the trust and see if the score is going up? Because, I mean, we need to get on 20% per annum growth, right? And ride this inflection point. So I was like, okay, as a CEO myself of this business, my trust is essentially the reputation I carry into the room. So I started digging deeper into figuring out how is reputation measured. Interestingly, there have been studies around this. And I want you to see this. This is data that shows how much value of the market cap of any business in a geography is directly correlated and dependent on the CEO's reputation. Look at some numbers. In the US, 38% the market value of the business is dependent on what investors think of the CEO, his skills, his vision, his abilities. Correct? But a very interesting insight here, that when you look at economies of Turkey, Indonesia, India, almost 60% the value of the company is derived from the CEO's reputation. The correlation with the CEO's reputation with respect to your market cap is much higher in these economies compared to Western economies. And if I had to probably think of a reason, I would think that maybe these economies are inherently low trust economies. When I have low trust on a business, I will buy from the guy I like. Maybe, just my inference. So I dug down further, wanting to figure out how can a CEO improve this. And here are certain factors that actually determine the score or the rating of a CEO's reputation. The CEO has a clear vision for the company, inspires and motivates others, is honest and ethical, is a good communicator internally, has a global business outlook. I was like, okay, makes sense, but how does a CEO convey all of this? In fact, when you look outside of the business, the external market judges your reputation based on how many events are you going out to and speaking at. Are you really seen as an industry expert where you are being invited by sessions such as this to speak about what's really happening and what is your view? And if that is really the case, the equation that measures trust started coming to me. And interestingly, was put together by this gentleman called Charles Green a few decades ago, which said trust is measured as credibility, reliability, authenticity, all divided by the perception of self-interest. So if the other person thinks that you're doing this for your own interest, trust goes down. The moment they believe you're doing this for the larger good of the society, of the country, of the consumers, of the employees, the trust goes up. Very interesting. So what do you really do? Credibility is purely basis your knowledge, your experience, your credentials, your qualifications. Reliability in companies, you would notice, is all a function of how predictable is the CEO's behavior. We've all seen companies where everyone's gauging, should I break this news to the CEO today? Don't think he's in the right mood. Terrible cultures, terrible. The CEO has to be predictable for things to work in an organization. So, okay, predictability. Authenticity is when a CEO can own up to their mistakes, narrate personal stories to say, yes, I've been through this and I understand, and I know how I can be human and I can make mistakes. And perception of self-interest is broken when you talk about constantly about doing good to the society at large, working towards nation building, ensuring that employees are paid even when COVID-19 happens, or making the best product for the customer that no other competitor is making. And the only way that you would see people can really drive all of this narrative today is when you see these leaders write about it on LinkedIn, on Twitter, maybe even on Instagram, I would hope. I would hope. And this is essentially a framework with 9 different functions that a CEO can optimize trust on through content on social media. You can take care of the perception that your investors could possibly hold about your company. Or if you want to acquire the right kind of talent, you could write about and speak about and distribute stories about how great people are at your workplace and how well you take care of them. The right narrative could also work in ensuring that the government doesn't come out with a bill that kills your industry overnight. We've seen that. Because it's the right kind of lobbying. And you as a CEO must just focus on 3 of these 9 things, and that's all. That's all. And the beauty, I promise, towards achieving that 20% growth in business is essentially 2 things. Learning and development and building trust in the market, both of which can be built on the back of data, which is so widely available in India today, much more than anywhere else in the world, and just one device in your pocket, which is your smartphone. That's it. That's it. And I would hope people stop looking as content for entertainment. When we guys take responsibility for the country, and with we guys, I don't mean myself, but all of you, We're also responsible for the media diet that everyone consumes. Do we want the youth to be consuming more entertaining dance reels? Yes, maybe. But maybe it's an onus on us to take care of not just our own L&D and R&D, but maybe theirs as well. So if there is anything that you know in this world, even if it's just less than 100 insights, I would urge you, put it down on paper, put it on camera, and publish it. Because it won't just change society at large, it will change you and your business. Thank you.